but his actual degree was that he was a dentist.
Yep.
Yeah.
Very, very
And
common.
so, yeah, and so it's surprisingly common how often dentists try to push themselves off as evolutionary scientists or former evolutionary scientists, whatever. I think it was Job Martin was one of them, and there was another one. The chairman of the board of education in Texas, Don McElroy, who was also a dentist. He was the one who famously said that somebody has to stand up to experts when he was trying to dismiss the. He was trying to dismiss the testimony of 150 scientists.
Yeah.
And so
I
disagree with these experts. Yeah.
Wasn't he the guy that said you had to keep chipping away at the empirical data?
That's exactly right. He told a class of fourth graders to keep chipping away at that empirical evidence.
Oh God!
And that's an important thing. I mean, because I got in a lot of trouble when I posted a video recently where I described what faith is, right? And I was told that I'm using the wrong definition, and I was told that I was corrected about this a number of times. When I put that religious faith, being specific here, that religious faith is a belief that is held independent of, meaning is not dependent on empirical evidence. And someone said, well, we have evidence. Well, you might have subjective impressions, and you might have assumptions of authority and arguments from authority and circular reasoning and all of that. And all of these things might seem to you to be evidence, but they're not empirical evidence. And I specified we're talking about empirical evidence. We're talking about scientific evidence here. Yeah. And I gave lists, multiple lists of definitions, not just from dictionaries. Well, it was like a dozen different dictionaries that said that I was right, but I also went to a bunch of different theologians and philosophers and so forth, all of them saying that, paraphrasing the same exact definition that I'm giving. And then thank you for reminding me about Don McElroy telling his fourth grade students to keep chipping away at that empirical evidence, because he was part of the Discovery Institute's move against what they called materialism. So they didn't want empirical evidence to even be a thing. They wanted supernatural evidence. They wanted subjective evidence. They wanted whatever you want to believe to be comparable to scientific evidence. So anyway, I got into it with these people who told me that I'm using the wrong definition. So I'm going to have a talk with them later on this evening. I'm going to have a talk with one of these people who blew up at me for using the wrong definition, and that I think is going to be. I think it's going to be an interesting conversation.
I've had similar kind of binary challenges, and largely dealing with the Jehovah's Witnesses, who generally nice people but delusional. When they challenge me, I'm like, well, I don't really have a reason to believe in magic, but they can never conceive of magic being exactly, by definition, what their God character is actually doing.
Yeah,
like,
so
no, it's not magic. God did it. It's not magic. It's just supernatural God something else.
Well,
so God will curse you, or God will bless you. And what is a curse and what is a blessing? A curse would be like a -5 on your saving throw, whereas a blessing would be a plus. So they're both magical enchantments, and this is like universally understood that a curse is a magical enchantment. It's just a negative one, and then a positive magical enchantment would be a blessing. So if you believe in blessings and you believe in curses, then you believe in magic.
See,
if you believe,
I think it's sorry.
Go ahead.
I was just gonna throw in, having been a person that was brought up heavily indoctrinated. I'm not religious anymore, but I grew up in a Nazarene type of atmosphere. So if you're not familiar with that particular Protestant faith, have a go with that. They're kind of in between Pentecostal and Baptist. You don't have to talk in tongues; it's not required, but it can happen. But they're not the bench warmers that Baptists are either. But they're very, very oppressive in nature, particularly towards women. Now, being a person that grew up in that environment, what we were kind of told when we were dealing with that sort of thing, you had the pretend magic, and anything that wasn't God's magic is evil magic. So if it's not associated with Jesus and God and the Bible, outside of that, that's if you even recognize that it's real, it's it's witchcraft, it's the devil, it's something wrong, it's the devil trying to fool you. That was all fake. That was the devil making up all that stuff. This is the one true magic. So that's kind of how TWUE.
I'm reading about the Scottish witch burning escapade trials pogrom that happened over about 250 years in my country, where about 12 to 16,000 people were strangled and then burned at the stake for no goddamn reason other than, well, people being afraid, fascists, and told to believe in fairy stories.
If they had seen the Royal Mile today and seen that one restaurant that's dedicated to the witch burnings, you know the one I'm talking about? It's a beautiful place.
Yeah, I absolutely do. Yeah.
Yeah. Is that the one that has the demon in the window? Because I got a picture on my Facebook of me worshiping that.
Yeah. And there's also, I mean, it's quite interesting. The Scottish environment is Protestant and Catholic and the extremes of both. But you have the Catholic cathedral and John Knox's house right next to it. But I was brought up on the edges of the Free Presbyterian Church of Scotland, which is no music, no decoration, wooden cross, separate the male and female animals on a Sunday, and it's really, really austere. Like Protestantism stripped down to the very, very bare harshness of it. Which I have actually more sympathy for that kind of austere practice than the more Catholic practices, but it's still the same bollocks.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's amazing to me that people will take I don't know whether you're nice people, because you brought this up before, well, they're very nice people, but they're completely, it doesn't matter how nice you are. Sure. My argument to convince you shouldn't have anything to do with how nice I am. As a matter of fact, the things that convinced me were actually not people being nice. It was people that made their own argument more difficult by being excessively rude. But when they're right, I still had to come. It took some time, because it often does. It often does, to realize that everything you've been saying up to this point is actually wrong, and then you have to go and tell that asshole out of that the guy that was such a dick about it. You got to say, you know what, fuck you, you're right.
Yeah.
You make a good point, Aron, and my only point in that comment was, I'm interested in what people believe and why they believe it, provided it helps them be a good person. And if they are, and they believe in whatever, I'm like, cool, just don't lie about science and don't pretend.
Well, if it was individual, if it was personal, then it wouldn't bother me so much, because whatever delusion you want to cling to, I don't really care. But if you get your delusions taught in school, to sequestered students and impressionable children looking to you with the authority of a teacher, well, then there's a problem, because you have a right. Yeah, you have a right to believe whatever horseshit you want. You really do, and I wholly defend your right to believe whatever you want, and whatever soothes or appeals to you, whatever. But and you have a right to teach your children whatever you want to believe too, which is unfortunate, because it overrides their rights. Because while you have a right to be wrong, and I actually have had a believer tell me that I couldn't correct his beliefs because he has the right to be wrong, and that it doesn't have to be right for him to believe it, and he can believe whatever he wants, regardless whether it's true or not. And I've even had people admit to me that what they believe is not true, but they're going to believe it anyway.
Yes.
You have that right, but the children have a right not to be deceived. They have a right not to be lied to by a teacher.
So, and coming as a, I have to just say, so I taught in the public school system 5 years. And I taught actually at a Christian homeschool for a while as well, for about 3.5 years. But in the public school system, teaching biology for 4 of those 5 years, and then chemistry for a year. Encountering, and this was out in the Bible Belt, bunch of farm kids. Okay, a bunch of farm kids, they hang out at church. That's where they go. There's like nowhere to go. They don't have cars. They, just think church is their jam. That's where they go to hang out. So it's very ingrained within the community. And so even one of the principals that I interviewed with asked me, how do you teach evolution? I said, well, I just go in. It's not my job to tell them what to think. I'm going to teach them how to think, present the evidence, and they come up with their own conclusions. That's exactly what you need to do as a teacher, is to say, this is what the evidence is. This is how it works together. That principal looked at me and said, they also need to know what they're fighting against. And I'm like, sweet Mary Mother of God. And I'm like, that's,
Kill me now.
Yeah, they're fighting against reality.
It's
apparently.
But
So
that was a constant battle. But when I entered the classroom, that I knew that was an elephant in the room. So I would sit there and like, you know what? You guys have been told what to think your entire lives. That's not what we're doing here. We're going to talk about controversial things because you're going to be grown in a few years. I'm not going to tell you what to think. You think whatever you want. It's up to you. I just want to make certain you understand what the words mean, how the stuff works, and what the evidence is. You're not going to get a fight from me. And so I just completely removed that element altogether. We're just going to.
I tend to be a little bit more harsh, which is probably why I don't teach children. And I'd start the lesson with all the stuff your pastor's been telling you. It's all fucking lies. And he lies to you because that's his job. And I hope it makes you feel nice and your fees are all comfy, because it's all bullshit.
Yeah, I wish there was lessons on integrity, that you don't state things as fact if you can't show that it's true.
Pretty basic.
Yeah, if it's not evidently true, that it's baseless speculation. In every other application besides religion, the religion is uniquely alone in this. Every other application, if you assert baseless speculation as though it were fact, you're lying.
Yeah.
There was a character on an old TV show called Cheers, a guy named Cliff, and his routine was he would just make up statistics off the top of his head. 67% of whatever. Well, he's just making it up, right? But that's a lie, isn't it? We would recognize that as a lie in any other instance. But with religion gets special excuses. Well, you can't prove that it's not that. Well, it doesn't matter if I can't prove that it's not that. You can't show that it is that, so we're done. You just asserted something that has no truth to it. You can say that it's the absolute truth, but you can't honestly say that if you can't show that it's true. So I'm never going to tell you anything is true unless I can show you that it is true.
Exactly right.
I think it's funny, all these creationists, all those that want to teach, that want to denigrate evolution, or that want to teach creationism in school, whatever. No, how few of them would even pass a quiz on what evolution is? The guy that just gave the seminar, who professed to be have specialized in evolutionary biology, right? That guy had no clue what evolution is at all, because he thought it was the origin of the cosmos.
I've challenged
among
some
other things.
I've challenged some creationists by describing stuff that's actually going on in my lab at the moment that involves change in genetic frequency in a reproducing population under selective pressure over time, with emergent traits that were not present in the progenitors. And I explain it in detail. And it's like, this is real world stuff that's happening, and we measure it and we understand it, and it cures people of horrible diseases. They're like, that's not evolution. Nope, it's not. So it is exactly by definition evolution. But what they want, Aaron and Mel, and this amazes me and I love it, they want a population of T cells to become elephants. Or, sprout.
So there was a senator. There was a senator who was receiving testimony in the state of Louisiana. Was a friend of mine was giving testimony about why they should teach evolution in school, and we're talking about how macroevolution, speciation of certain cell types have been identified. So they were talking about like bacterial evolution that was documented by Dobzhansky was the first one, I think, to get documentation of macroevolution in the lab. And so they're giving these, and they're talking about how they evolve into new species. And the senator interrupted and said, "Did the bacteria turn into humans?"
Oh God.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the people giving the testimony, of course, are now dumbfounded because they just realized, yeah, that the guy that it was elected position, he's now like a sovereign authority over other people to some degree. This guy is a barking moron.
See, it is. I hold this idea. Okay, having been what we call a measured teacher, where half of my evaluation was based on a singular test given to a bunch of kids. All I needed was one kid to get in a car wreck on their way to the test, which happened once, by the way, or to get in a fight with their parents. All of that. Oh, okay. So half of my evaluation was based on the single test by like Pearson, okay, like a textbook company. So I propose we have politicians, if they're going to make these kids take these standardized tests, which include evolution, by the way, they need to be able to pass it themselves. If you can't pass high school science, you do not have any business making any kind of laws in this country.
And we ought to put down the answers on the multiple choice. The multiple choice questions ought to include the answers that creationists think are there. You know, what is evolution? Yes. What is macroevolution? One thing turning into another completely different thing.
Oh God.
Or giving birth to. One thing giving birth to another completely different thing. Or another fundamentally different thing.
Lots of
they want something. They want, and one guy who described it to me this way recently. He said that you have a pair of parents of any given species that suddenly give birth to a baby of a completely different species than its parents are. Well, it doesn't work that way. But not only does he want a new species, he wants a species that is not related to its parents.
Oh God!
As in,
okay, I have some
not belonging to any of. Yeah, it's so they want to get a pair of hamsters to give birth to a banana. Something like that. They want it to be something that has no relation to its own ancestry. And you think that the creationists, the wanna believers that are saying these things, are making a desperate attempt not to understand. They want to maintain a misunderstanding because they know that if they know what it really is, they risk believing it.
Right.
Yeah. Aron,
it's just weird.
To capture that and pose a question, it fascinates me. But to what extent do you think there are in the hardcore creationist community? To what extent are they grifters or genuinely ignorant? And I mean that in the fullest and most gentle sense of the word. And to what extent do the dogmatic people then become actual believers over time?
Well, this is a difficult thing for me to estimate because while I've seen rampant dishonesty among creationists, I mean just overt dishonesty, not everybody is this way. And it's easy for me to want to put a blanket category on the mindset of all these people. But the one thing that puts me in check on that is that all of the most outspoken advocates of reason and science that I know of today, almost all of them were former believers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So how can it be that every one of these people that I now look to as being an extremely rational person, a beautiful example of rational thinking and philosophy and everything, what was that mind doing when it was a believer?
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't think that necessarily that it is intelligence. I think that faith is auto-deceptive. I think that religious belief is more akin to a chemical addiction than it is to an epistemology, for example. I think it's just it's a way of unthinking that
found it
stifles
to
the
be
mind.
quite therapeutic. I found it as a coping mechanism for me. And, I grew up practically in poverty, single parent home, actually had sleep paralysis. So I thought demons were real. So, you have that,
Oh, you know what?
It wasn't just me. It was my sister and my mom too. So our whole house was possessed with demons and screaming lots. So that's a,
Power of Christ
so that
compels
just
you.
reinforced. That just
Yeah, I have
reinforced
to
all of
confess that I have some very interesting dreams. I think, you know, on the occasions that I remember them. Sometimes they're quite interesting, and some of them, a lot of them, involve one of two things that make no damn sense in my rational world. Is it one, I have superpowers, and it's been this way since I was a little
Yes.
kid. I still have dreams today where I can fly, where I have, you know, one or more superpowers beyond flight. And then other than that, there's all kinds of supernatural things that exist in the dreams. So
Yeah. Have you wrestled a fire elemental in hell? Because that's awesome. Let me just say.
Yeah, it wasn't a fire
I
elemental,
wanted
and it wasn't
to.
in hell. But I remember
Well,
being accosted by one demon and being possessed by another while trying to fight off the internal one at the same time as fighting the external one. And remember feeling like a complete hypocrite because you fuckers don't exist.
but they make for great stories. And so when I encounter somebody like certain Christian apologists who are like, well, I've met Satan, I said, I have too. And I've wrestled fire elementals in hell. I've been held down by demons. I had monks standing around my bed and praying for me. And, you know, it's like I've had spirits come out of my closet and tell me things. All of it sleep paralysis, but I didn't know that's what it was. And nobody could, my pastors were like, you need to pray more. And I'm like, oh, well, that helped. So
now let's talk about that for just a moment. Let's talk about that for just a moment. God knows everything that any of us is ever going to do. God has decided in advance which ones of us are going to believe and which ones of us won't. Which ones of us will be damned. Before we were born, he knows which ones of us are going to be damned. He knows every situation, every sparrow that falls. He knows why. He knows whether we are going to pray to him and about what are we going to pray. He knows the question we're going to ask before we ask it.
Yeah.
And when we watches every time you take a shit, every single time.
He knows that most desperate of all situations, when we will plead with anything to get the solution, to find our child or whatever it is, that is the most terrible situation we can imagine in our most desperate hour, when whole congregations of people will pray together for the same question, and the answer will still be no. Could have been prevented. Could have been prevented in a way that gave him credit for something, you know, and just the answer's no. Just exactly like he was never there in the first place. Now I remember saying a prayer when I was a kid that I liked to pretend had been answered, and I thought that this was a very wise prayer to tell. I said, let me pray that, you know, you have those really horrible life-changing moments, the moment that changes your life, and when you're on your deathbed, you remember that this was the moment that it all went south, right? This moment when the most terrible thing happened. When I have that one moment that for decades later, this thing happened, and I'll be wishing to God that this thing didn't happen. Let God prevent that thing from happening. Just let me make that prayer. Now, can I say that it's been answered?
So far,
it depends on how you look at it. I haven't had that defining horrible moment happen to me. So if I was one who wanted to believe just because I